It's becoming apparent that Cardano is going to be a dApp juggernaut right out of the gate. We talk quite a bit about the crazy size of the Cardano dApp ecosystem maps and the sheer number of projects that seem to be out there. But it's a whole nother thing when you see these project leads on video and realize just how serious these projects really are. Ready? Let's go. This December Cardano mid-month update was a good one for understanding the true depth of the Cardano dApp roster. It left you with an understanding that the situation is not that we might have half a dozen marquee dApps and a big roster of, subgrade dApps that nobody's going to care about. It might be the case that we have 5 dozen marquee dApps. I don't think anybody really knows yet. We won't know until they actually launch, but I think the depth of this dApp roster is much greater than anybody anticipated, and Cardano is gonna look like a juggernaut right out of the gates with this many very serious. We started off with Nigel Hemsley, who told us about the vast array of dApp developers working with IOG right now. He mentioned Artano NFT Marketplace, which is already live and in the wild and has a working KYC system. He also mentioned the groups I think of as Haskell shops like M Labs and Obsidian Labs that are working to get their first dApps out right now. He's expecting them to be on the test net by the end of the week. And I'm assuming when he said that it was end of the week when he was recording, which would have, I think, been sometime last week. So maybe those dApps are already on the test net as I'm talking right now. He also mentioned Binar Apps. He said they have a DEX coming online, and they're going to be one of the first developers to be taking their dApp mobile. Obviously, mobile will be a huge step forward for adoption for Cardano dApps. Nigel also mentioned that IOG is offering these dApp developers all the help they can. Along those lines, Tim Harrison estimated there were about 30 meetings with different projects over the last few weeks, and they're currently tracking 175 active projects. That's right. Think about that for a second. There are 30 different projects who were actually meeting with IOG over the last couple of weeks. I think it's safe to assume there's some number of other projects who maybe are meeting with IOG in the second half of December, barring holiday time. Maybe they're meeting with IOG in the first part of January. Maybe there are some that already met with IOG in November. I don't think we know how many projects we're talking about who are not just a part of this 175 active projects, which is a pretty crazy number. Those are active projects. But among those, we might have 60 projects that are very, very serious, the kinds of projects who would come in and meet with IOG just to work everything out so that they're perfectly ready when they actually go live on the blockchain. This is a really different scenario than sort of like the multitude of Solidity copy pasta projects. We're not talking about these projects where people just take code that's already out there, deploy it on the blockchain, and call it good. Slap, a genre label on it, like this is a DEX, this is a lending project. These aren't these don't sound like those types of projects. These are projects that are actually building their platforms and engaging in a high enough level of innovation that they're actually coming in and meeting with IOG. I think when other blockchains that are, say, EVM compatible, when they say, hey, we've got X number of DEXs, we've got X number of lending protocols, we have this many NFT marketplaces, I think that's a little bit different number if you take into account how many of those projects are just Solidity copy pasta projects. But on Cardano, that's not really possible because nothing's deployed yet. There's nothing to copy. This is going to be a very different scenario in 2022 for Cardano when these projects actually launch, because the threshold, the minimum threshold is they have to be able to figure out how to do whatever their use case is in a UTXO context. So these aren't going to be the copy pasta projects. We're going to have a huge number of very serious projects right out of the gate. Next up, we got John Woods talking more about those protocol level improvements they recently made, the block size increase from 64 to 72 KB. That's completed. They'll be increasing that block size again, which we already know. He also said eventually they may get to the point that they can fit more than the current four, maybe something like 5 or 6 scripts in a block. If you don't know what he means when he says scripts, we talk about smart contracts, but really what we're talking about is just some arbitrary logic that's attached to a UTXO that describes how that UTXO can be spent. Those are scripts, and really that's what we have in Cardano and in blockchains in general. It's really just logic about how something can be spent. In the case of Cardano, it's how a UTXO can be consumed and spent. And they think eventually they might be able to move to 5 or 6 scripts in a block after some more block size increases. They also increased the abstract memory units available to each script in the block. This was also a 12.5% increase. They plan to make another 12.5% increase soon. Then he talked about pipelining. We've heard this mentioned a couple times, and there haven't been stellar explanations of what was meant by pipelining. But he says they'll be looking at rolling this out over maybe the next 6 months, or they'll be developing it over the next 6 months, or looking at it very intently. But I got the impression he was thinking maybe this could be rolled out sometime over the next 6 months. This is a secure way to propagate blocks prior to validation. This will allow for quite an increase in L1 throughput, John Wood says. Next up, the expected third component of Triple H, Kevin Hammond. He had continued great things to say about working with SundaeSwap and pointed out that SundaeSwap has been thinking about things like how the network load from their project will affect other network users. This is kind of interesting because we think about these projects as being in competition with each other for the attention, Lovelaces, the usage, the adoption with all the other projects. It's great to hear that projects are thinking more about the benefit of the ecosystem and not just about their own aims. That was great to hear. He said that the IOG SundaeSwap collaboration will result in some general dApp guidelines that will be rolled out to other dApp developers. Next up, we got Pi Lanningham from SundaeSwap. I've said it before, he's a great communicator of technical concepts. He stressed that they know they are just one dApp on Cardano. This is consistent with Kevin Hammond saying they were actually, thinking about network load and how that would affect the entire ecosystem. Pi said the testnet is going fantastically with no big sort of protocol architecture breaking bugs. He said, of course, they're making improvements. They're getting feedback from the testnet and they're making improvements, but that the core parameters all look great. He said with the 12.5% increase in block size, they're hitting about 90% of the daily Uniswap throughput. Think about that. Uniswap is gigantic. And he's saying with these protocol level changes that John Woods described earlier, they're hitting 90% of the Uniswap throughput on a daily basis. They're excited where those numbers are going to go with the Babbage improvements in 2022. Pi also noted that SundaeSwap is a hybrid order book and automated market maker with notions of limit orders. I think we knew this, but he noted that this is very different than a Uniswap style pure automated market maker. And there are some user interface improvements that'll communicate these differences better to users. He also mentioned the improvements to the scooper model to improve throughput. I think those have been well publicized. Everybody kind of knew about those who's following the news on the SundaeSwap testnet. Pi wasn't able to provide a mainnet launch date. I kind of got the impression, and I'm glad because, he explained, hey, they're basically trying to do things the Cardano way and make sure everything is perfect. They've done everything possible to have the best possible product when they hit mainnet. Of course, they're going to continue improving after they hit mainnet, but they want to make sure that they have the best possible product when they hit mainnet. So I think there was a little bit of anticipation. It seemed like maybe on the IOG side, they were expecting that maybe SundaeSwap was going to be able to provide a launch date in this mid-month update. Not the case, but I think it's for good reasons. At this point, John Woods came back and told us about 3 Cardano improvement proposals, CIPs, that will help Cardano dApp developers. The first was reference scripts. These are Plutus scripts that are stored on the chain. Once we have that, the transaction will only need to include a pointer to that on-chain script instead of the script itself. Developers could just use these scripts as libraries, include a pointer to those scripts, and it's going to make life much easier on the developers. Number two involved reference inputs. Currently, something like an Oracle would store data like a forex rate, like the number of dollars equivalent to a euro. They would store these in the datum of an unspent transaction output of a UTXO. Currently, to use that bit of data, you would have to include that UTXO in your transaction, and then you would have to recreate that UTXO in order for someone else to then use it. So currently, because this type of data is being stored in the datum in the UTXO itself, you basically have to consume that UTXO. You have to spend that UTXO in order to access that data. Reference inputs would allow you to read the data without actually spending or consuming the UTXO. So we've talked about this before. These are read-only UTXOs. So you could access the data. You could pull that Oracle information, say the price on the dollar euro trading pair, and you could read that. The transaction could read that without actually having to consume that UTXO and create a new UTXO so that data would remain available to the next user. This is a big improvement for concurrency. He also talked about inline datums. Datums are a little bit of state. So we just talked about, sort of the forex rate being included in the datum. That's a little bit of data, a little bit of state, that forex rate from the Oracle that lives at a UTXO, except we don't currently actually store the data on chain. We just store a hash of the datum. Inline datums would allow for actual storage of the datum itself on chain. Again, this is a big convenience for developers who would have access to the actual data and not just the hash. So if you think about all three of these SIPs, they're all an increase in on-chain storage and state. I'm just glad we're going in this direction. We started from this UTXO perspective on the world, only local state, limiting instances of on-chain stored state in a lot of cases. And now we started with that and not with the sort of crippling global state that Ethereum can't seem to figure out how to manage most efficiently. That's one of the big problems in the Ethereum ecosystem. You have this enormous amount of global state that just keeps growing and growing. How do you possibly manage all that global state? In Cardano, we started with the opposite. We started with notions of sort of local state only, and now we're adding in these additional instances of on-chain stored state where it makes sense, instead of just starting with all the state like Ethereum did. I'm glad we're going in this direction and not the other. Finally, Matthew Capps was brought on to help catch us up on a few projects currently building on Cardano. This was really interesting because they had the actual project leaders come on the mid-month update. You could really tell by the way these guys were talking about their projects. They're not dabblers. These are serious individuals building out serious projects. And if this is any indication of the 30 some odd projects that we're talking to Cardano just in the last couple of weeks, I think we're going to have not a handful of great dApps on the Cardano ecosystem. It's looking like we're going to have a whole bunch of very serious dApps. And the content was pretty interesting. We heard from Genius Yield. They talked about taking a first principles approach to DeFi smart contracts. We heard from Stable Shift, another DeFi project, the aforementioned Artano here, Cardax building another DEX, and also Vi Finance building another DEX. We are going to have so many DEXs. The competition for DEX usage is going to be intense in Cardano. And I don't know exactly what the competitor blockchains are going to be able to do about this. We've got Ethereum, obviously, which has the problems we've discussed ad nauseum on this channel. You all already know about those. But for any potential DEX user who's truly interested in decentralization. And I think that's a big chunk of what this whole crypto thing is. Sure, you got people who are happy to use the very centralized chains, say the Binance Smart chains of the world, and they don't actually care about decentralization. But I honestly believe a huge chunk of the crypto user world does care about centralization. It's going to be very difficult for other blockchains to make a case that the Cardano DeFi ecosystem is not the DeFi ecosystem that is on the very most decentralized chain. And based on what we're seeing out of these project leaders, it's looking like there is a crazy amount of attention to detail and effort being put into these projects. So the projects are also very likely to run very well. I mean, sure, there's going to be little things to work out in the beginning, but we're going to very quickly get to a place where a lot of these dexes, a very large number of these dexes are going to be working great. And they're going to be on the most decentralized large cap blockchain. So it's going to be really hard for other DeFi ecosystems to make a case that Cardano is not the DeFi ecosystem running on the most decentralized chain, and that the platforms don't all work great. I think this is going to be a beautiful thing to watch in 2022. I'm very excited for it. I hope you're starting out a great week, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.